Humans are meaning makers. We create stories. It's the way that we get some texture and traction about our world. We build context by creating stories. Humans also like to be right. So one would be correct in deducing that we like to be right about the stories that we tell. And our stories are not all necessarily choices. Often the stories that we absorb, we're a sponge for stories from our culture, from our family, ancestral, from our society. I mean, they're coming in lots of different places. So we believe a lot of things that we don't even know that we chose to believe them, because we kind of got them by osmosis. And then many stories are created through our experiences in life, what we perceive them to mean, what we perceived others, what they thought that they meant. So from our experiences, our joys, our traumas, we all make them mean something about us. And this is normal that we do this. We are very egocentric because this is the way that we see the world. We see it out of ourselves. So when things happen in the world, we default and rebound it off of ourselves. Like, what am I making that mean about me? When anything happens, if you notice, we reflect it off of ourselves. What does that mean for me? So we create the stories, and we like to be right. So what stories are you making right? What stories are you going out and then validating in the world? So we have good stories. Many of us have really challenging ones. Most all of us have a mixed bag. One of my stories was that I was bad. So I had absorbed that I was bad. I actually thought that, like, to my core, there was just something, there was something wrong with me. And I went out and I validated that story. And I see now so many ways that I went out and I lived this story, and I made it seem like this thing that was wrong with me because I was ashamed of it, that my badness. I made it seem like it was a choice. So I'm like, I'm bad. So like this rebel party girl that wanted it to be a choice because it was too challenging for me to absorb that it was in pain. So I chose the story, not only that I was bad, but on top of that, I chose the story that I was bad and I wanted to be. And then I went out and validated that. So I was continuously in trouble for things. Getting into all this trouble, and people would be like, why are you doing that? And I'd kind of be like, what did you expect? Like, I'm bad. I'm like, imagine me in like the grease lightning jacket, you know. But really, we all do this in some way, in many ways. Buddhism calls it the wound that seeks the arrow. Especially when we're talking about a wound story, a core belief about ourselves. So the wound that seeks the arrow. So this is a limiting belief about myself. This is a painful story that I've told about myself. Common stories are that I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, I'll never be part of. You know, a big one for me is, like I mentioned, that I was bad. But the wound then seeks the arrow, rather than just getting, we're not just getting shot, like, oops, that just happened to happen. It's like, no, we're actively seeking it out to validate our paradigm about the world, the context that we believe about the world, often subconsciously. But isn't that interesting? I love that phrase, the wound that seeks the arrow. And while we're talking about arrows, this extends into another a metaphor that is used in Buddhism a lot about the first and the second arrow. So the first arrow is what happens in our life. something happens. And then the second arrow is how we respond to it. So something happens that's painful, but it's objective. It's a painful thing, but it happened. The second arrow is like, I am sad. I'm lonely and I'm sad about something. That's what's happening. But then my second arrow would be is I'm going to be mad at myself for being sad. So I'm layering this extra suffering on top of it. So I've already got shot by an arrow, and now I'm just going to shoot myself again. That's our response to things. So the first and second arrow, that's one way to look at it. They also call it dukkha, is called suffering. So dukkha is suffering. Dukkha is pain, something that happens. But then dukkha, kind of fun to say, dukkha is our suffering about our suffering. That's when we're mad and we're sad because we're sad. And it's that extra layer that we put on top of it, that judgment and criticism that we put on top. So the wound that seeks the arrow is like, I'm not even waiting for that second arrow to come. It's like, I'm hurt and I'm going to go and chase it up. Have you ever, you just find yourself in the same situation again and again, or you keep like dating the same person, like in different bodies, but like, how did I get here again? It's this kind of familiarity of circulating challenge and suffering, and it's like, why does it keep happening? And this is a component of it. There's a component of it that is habitual familiarity, that we just keep doing what we always do because we've ingrained this pattern. That's a piece of it. But there's another piece of it, is that wound that seeks the arrow, is that we're validating our story about the world. And it's kind of hard to pop that bubble, of, oh, wow, that's just my perception. That's just my story, because we believe our reality. We believe our stories. So the inquiry is like, what are you believing about yourself? And these stories are layered and they go very deep, and often we'll notice just the little ones on top. But then we can layer and ladder it down. And we need to realize, like, is this story something that I make up? So let's use something at the top here. Like, let's say, like, we had a date and you didn't show up. I would make that mean that you didn't call me back. How about we'll use something like that? You didn't call me back. I could make that mean about me that you were upset at me or you were mad at me. So when, objectively you could have, something came up, there was a good reason, but the story that I create is that you're mad at me. And then I start thinking about all the ways that, what could I have done? And thinking about all of these things, beginning to build this story, recalling all the other times or making up all of these things. And I'm validating this idea, like, remember when so-and-so did this to me, and yada, yada, yada. So I'm kind of seeking this arrow, because maybe my core wound, maybe deeper down, is like, I already have this story of not being good enough or not being lovable. So this can reiterate the rightness of that story. And then if we go down and really look at the base of that story, which all the other things are built on top of, we think about our architecture and our foundation, like, what are our foundational stories about ourselves? If my foundational story about myself wasn't that I was unlovable, then I might not, at this higher layer, think when I didn't get a call back that that's what that means. Does that make sense? It's like, depending on our foundational way that we see the world and see ourselves in it, our reactions to what happens are shifted based on that, based on the depth of the grooves and which way they go. Very interesting stuff. Lots of inquiry here, but really just wanting to share the question and the invitation to explore, what are you believing about yourself? And how has that belief affected you and affected your life? What has it kept you from doing? What has it maybe pushed you towards doing? I can see how my story incredibly has shaped my life and my choices. The choice or the idea that I was bad, like how I rode that story and how it still comes up for me. And because I know that that's my story and that's my well-worn groove of a story, like that's my quickest, that's the path that's so familiar to me that I'll lean in first. I still do it, but I'm aware that I do it. I can watch it, so I can catch it quicker now of like, I'm leaning back into that. And just because it's comfortable doesn't mean that it's healthy. And when you notice, you can U-turn and come back out a little bit. And I can say, okay, what am I believing about myself right now? What has actually happened? And what am I making it mean? That's another beautiful inquiry. One of my favorites. What am I making this mean? When I can feel myself creating stories, feel myself being anxious about something, like, what am I making this mean? And often what we make it mean is either is based on something else. It's based on our mood for that day. It's based on the state of our nervous system. It's based on, have we eaten or not? And it's also based layer down about our life experience, our core stories. So all of this, cause and effect. I hope that you got something from this. It was a kind of a Mod Podge of lots of things we've been talking about in Emerge this week. Again, talking about the wound that seeks the arrow, we mentioned. Also, the first and second arrow. That one is pain, unavoidable, and the second arrow is our judgment and criticism about the pain. Dukkha. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but the wound that seeks the arrow is really like the OG, like the original confirmation bias. And that is really what that is. And I think that I love using the old stories about it, especially because we tend to think that we're ludicrous for some of the things that we do and think, but then we realize this was named 2,500 years ago, and probably much longer before that. This is when we have it in writing. It's like, this is a human thing. There's nothing wrong with you. It's a natural human, it's a human tendency. And with awareness, we can go against the grain of some of our tendencies or samskaras. But not until we have, that awareness. So as you explore, you might find some things that feel a little bit edgy. That would be your first arrow, but don't judge yourself about what you find either. Leave the second arrow alone. Let me know if this made sense, if you have any questions, and it's good stuff. I'm running the Emerge program once or twice a year. I love it. It's my favorite. It's my favorite thing. I have a retreat coming up in September, so going to start doing some in-person stuff with it as well. It's, using lenses of Buddhism and yoga and neuroscience, a lot of polyvagal theory, which is so good to look at how we human, how we come back to ourselves, whether we're coming back through substance addiction or negative self-talk. There's so many routes that we use to get away from ourselves and that we can use to come back as well. So reach out if you're interested in any of that stuff. That's all.